Welcome back to Mechs Tech. Today we have our 100 subscriber special. We're going to be going over each of the 40 decks that I've done deck techs for, kind of ranking them specifically against each other and not against like a meta or just like, decks in general. We're going to base these rankings off a few pieces of criteria, including how consistent the deck is in terms of getting off its game plan, how hard it is for that deck to win, how fun the deck is to play, both, as myself and against as other players. As a combo player at heart, that last part, in terms of how fun it is kind of how combo-y it is for me. But we should have a good time here, right? You guys all mean the world to me. And like I said, this video wouldn't be happening without you. We wouldn't have a 100 subscriber special without at least 100 of you who enjoyed the content that I make and decided to go ahead and click that subscribe button, maybe even rang that bell. With that being said, let's get started. Blast from the Past happens to be up first and is about casting historic spells off the top of your library to get some extra value. Specifically, you're gonna get some food and clues and like whatnot for this deck in terms of that extra value. But we're looking to swarm the field with a bunch of tokens, kind of win via combat damage. I definitely enjoy this type of strategy, but didn't feel like this deck did it as well as some of the other decks on the list. I do think it plays pretty consistently. There's even a nasty infinite combo lurking in the deck. I love going infinite. So, spoilers, there's probably a ton of those here. With that being said, I really feel like Blast from the Past is a decent combos, but not a consistent winner type of deck. Let's go ahead and move that on up here. Moving over to Antrix and Nev, Twin Casters. It's a Simic deck, which, my favorite color combination happens to be Simic. It combos really well, it swarms the field super quickly, entirely due to the fact that my commander doubles the number of tokens I'm creating. And let me tell you something, I'm creating token copies of my commander that aren't legendary, and really upping that token doubling game. It has a lot of ramp and card draw to fuel all those, tokening shenanigans that I want to get up to. I don't think it goes infinite with anything in the deck, but it is really good, and I think it's our first above average deck, despite a lack of infinite combos in the deck. Adeliz, the Cinder Wind, is a deck tech that I actually put together for Nate, a German friend from over on Twitch. It's a spell slinging deck, so it's a little less creature heavy than most of the decks that I tend to play. But that, I think, comes with the territory of being a spell slinger as opposed to a big old stompy boy kind of deck. It does some like Kindred Wizard stuff. There's a couple other types of creatures in the deck that just happen to also work well with the spell slinging archetype. As most of our spells are kind of just one-offs, I don't feel like it has the necessary damage to win consistently. It is fun to play, though. Who doesn't love slinging spells around left and right? But, that being said, again, decent combos, just not consistent, but I do think it's a little stronger than Blast from the Past. Let's go ahead and put that up here. Ahoy Mateys is a graveyard recursion deck with potential. We didn't focus too heavily on the ways to remove the finality counters the commander is passing out, as they rip our pirates back from the depths of Davy Jones' locker. But these pirates are here to play dirty. We're stealing cards, running away with card advantage as we slip our creatures past yours and deal damage again and again. Upper decent combo is kind of still the place for the pirates as they are, but I definitely feel like they could move up if you were to take the deck in a more finality counter removal direction. you're definitely jumping through some hoops to get there, but I think the payoff is quite huge. Anawan, the Ruined Thief, was a fast, I'm gonna mill you before you could blink deck that I've actually taken apart since making the deck tech. It's not because the deck didn't work either. My pod really doesn't like playing against mill, and I can understand why. But don't you worry, some of those rogues found their way into my new fairy deck, so it all kind of worked out in the end. The deck was full of low-cost creatures, and like ways to kind of get that mill going, which is great because in blue-black we don't actually have a ton of ramping options. The deck was super consistent, made some decent combos, but ultimately wasn't fun to play since the entire table would kind of make it an archenemy situation. So, Anawan's going to end up in No One Likes Mill. Blood Rites is a very recent Zac tech, actually. I think it was the very last one that I did before making this video. But it's from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and there's some Orzhov Vampire Kindred nonsense going on. We're looking to, do Orzhov Vampire things. We're draining opponent's life, or drawing extra cards by sacking creatures. I've only gotten to play it twice so far, but it definitely looks like it could be a real powerhouse in the future once I've made major overhauls. Not even major, but like beyond the first 10 card change. You know what I mean? In its current state, I'd put it in above average, above Adrix and Nev, but I think once the changes are made, it could, easily make its way up into super consistent, maybe even God tier. Bernard, Ginger Sculptor, follows up our vampires, and we didn't really make it a Golem Kindred deck. We instead simply looked to abuse some ETBs for value. We have a lot of creatures in the deck that could be evoked or just sacrifice themselves for, those added values. Tons of ways to double up all the, ETB triggers as well as the number of tokens that we're creating with our commander. Plenty of ramp and card draw to fuel, the game continuing. Landing this solidly in above average. Bruvax, the Grandiloquent, is another mill deck, and one that actually isn't mine. This one actually belongs to my fiancée, and much like the Ruined Thief we've already gone over, isn't really loved by the group. It's also a little less consistent. It kind of lacks the creatures necessary to block your opponents who are now all gunning for you since you're milling them out. It does have an instant kill combo, so a few points definitely need to be tossed its way. But in the end, it still ends up in mill isn't fun, or no one likes mill rather. Chishiro the Shattered Blade is up next, and when I think of powerful combos, I think of Chishiro. We're out here abusing those +1/+1 counters and making our boys beefy and unblockable while slinging some non-combat damage all at the same time. We're doing this at top speed, having powerful creatures out while our opponents are still trying to just develop a board state. Newer cards like All Will Be One and Agatha's Soul Cauldron add even more power to this deck, landing it in super consistent. Eldrazi Unbound kind of remains a misleading name for this deck. We definitely added a few more Eldrazi to it, but ultimately, this is definitely more of just a colorless deck than it is an Eldrazi one. That being said, the deck is going to Value Town. It can create infinite colorless mana, which, is super useful when most of your spells are kind of a high cost, or at least the ones that you really want to get out. The commander also rewards you for playing these high CMC spells. That being said, the deck is a little slow out of the gate. Like I said, a lot of your cards, at least your key ones, are a little on the expensive side. The deck isn't really suited to going wide. It's more so looking to have a few big stompy boys. Still a good showing of combo potential and big swings in a game, especially kind of later in the game. But decent combos, but not consistent is where this ends up. I think it'll be above Adeliz and below Ahoy Mateys. Elven Council is up next, and we're looking to scry all day, digging for powerful combo pieces, and being rewarded along the way. Card selection isn't as good as card advantage, but it's a close second in my mind. The deck is also Simic, so it has access to all the ramp we need to thin out the deck and get us playing ahead of curve, landing it in a spot under decent combos, but not consistent. It'll be at the very top of it. It's like, it teeters on the edge. I could put it up into above average. Yeah, you know what, we're gonna move it. We're gonna move it up to above average. It is decided. I am the decider. It has been decided. Enduring Enchantments is going to be up next. Powerful enchantment recursion deck that lets you reuse your powerful enchantments to, devastating effect. Most players don't have a ton of removal for enchantments, so the first time that you have these enchantments out, there's a good chance that they're going to stick around for a while. Enchantment has a ton of support in these three colors to keep your hand full, your mana plentiful, and, a payoff with some larger-than-life creatures that are going to let you kind of maintain control over the board, landing this in above average. I'm going to put it... Let's do above Adrix and Niv and below Bernard. Yeah. They're all subjective, so it's like a little hard to be like, this is precisely where it falls. A lot of decks. Let's do Explorers of the Deep next. So Explorers of the Deep is a deck after my own heart. I love Merfolk and their affinity towards +1/+1 counters. With our commander allowing each of our Merfolk to explore each turn, specifically at the start of combat, we really get to churn through our deck faster than most and snowball out of control. With a few ways to make our now massive Merfolk unblockable, swinging in for the win is Child's Play, and we get there through Value Town, landing this deck at a solid, super consistent. Fey Dominion. Fey Dominion is an amazing control deck. I only swapped out a few cards in it, like I think maybe just like the 10 that I mentioned in the video. I tend to make further alterations, obviously, to these decks once I've built them and played them a few times. But man, is this thing controlling. The first time I played it after making the alterations, I controlled a pod. Like, no one got to cast spells without me saying it was okay. My life total, never changed. 40 the whole time. Easily landing these fairies in super consistent. Food and Fellowship is another powerhouse of a deck. Our partner commanders play off each other really well. They're both super easy to cast in the first few turns. Sure, Frodo is the one that tends to be the one dealing the damage, but those food tokens that Sam generates, not to be underestimated. We have ways of turning that life gain into extra value and even attacking our opponents with the food tokens that we generate each turn. So, definitely another super consistent deck. Gyelta and Mavrin are out here creating some creature tokens from the board. Doing what tokens do best and creating so many you can't even shake a stick at them. Do you want some alternate win cons with a massive board state, but still maintain the option to win via massive armies swinging out? This deck is definitely for you. That being said, I think some of the other token decks do this a little better, so it'll land itself in the lower part of above average. Hinata Dawn-Crowned is up next, and sadly only exists on Moxfield for me. I do have a copy of the commander, I just don't have copies of every card that I want to have in the deck. This deck, is going to super value town. All of our spells are getting, like, pretty big discounts. The deck is also taxing our opponents to death. They're not going to be able to touch our stuff. They're not going to be able to cast spells for free without, like, us getting value. So this is our 5th super consistent deck. I'm going to put it at the bottom only because I haven't actually gotten to play the deck. Like, I've gotten to Goldfish it a couple times. But without having the deck physically, I've done Spell Table a few times with Moxfield, but it's not my ideal way of play. Host of Mordor feels like it should be powerful, but the handful of times that I've seen it play, it's very hit or miss. The deck has a kind of high curve and isn't ramping as hard as you would need it to in order to play that curve consistently. When it does work, obviously you're getting these very big payoffs, these big swings in your favor, but when it really isn't working, you really just don't seem like you're having any impact on the game. All that to say, Mordor is in the lower end of decent combos, but not consistent for me. Kyler, Sigardian Emissary, is up next and lets my +1/+1 counter Hearts sing. I've had all of my humans at well over +100, +100. This deck tends to be a vomit your hand onto the field and swing fast playstyle that can leave it a little vulnerable to board wipes. But a well-timed, Heroic Intervention or Teferi's Protection, could really use that to your advantage. If it had better card draw, it'd make super consistent, but as it is, I have to relegate it to the high above average category. Ishin to Heavens as 1 is a capital N nasty deck with some infinite combat tricks to close out the game. We're doubling attack triggers and doubling combat while we're at it. We're driving home that value as we hit our opponents hard and fast. It doesn't always work out. I've seen this deck, going turbo, but I've also seen it kind of like peter out a little bit. Landing a promising deck in above average. Probably solidly in the middle here. I think it would definitely land in super consistent if I were better at mulliganing. Which will just come with time with that deck. Every deck is different. What you should and shouldn't keep varies from deck to deck. But I think it's still an above average, deck within my pool. Masters of Evil is another deck that if I could just make it, like, consistently play out the way I want to, would be unstoppable. But it just isn't the case. This deck runs well and doesn't rely too heavily on combat damage to trigger those villainous choices for our opponents, but it's those choices that paint a huge target on our back, and a bunch of 3/3s just isn't enough to keep our opponents at bay. Landing are extermination plans in decent combos, but not consistent. Mishra Eminent One is a powerful beast that is built around taking infinite extra turns and chipping away at our opponent's life on each of them. Our commander is here to create copies of our artifacts, and our artifacts are here to provide value both when they ETB and when they leave play. For a while, it was my most powerful deck, but it has since been dwarfed, but still definitely holds a place in my heart. Up in super consistent. Paradox Power is another of the Doctor Who decks, and this one works much better in my opinion. There's a large focus on casting from exile and passing out power when you do so. On top of that, all of your creatures with counters have a pseudo-vigilance of sorts, which allows you to really freely swing those creatures without having to worry about the crackback that you would otherwise receive. There's also some infinite extra turn potential happening in this deck. Landing it in super consistent, where infinite extra turns specifically kind of all belong. Gonna put you mid-pack. Up next is our first God tier deck for me, and it's Planeswalker Party. This deck pops off hard. Like, most players don't run Planeswalker removal, and most of our Planeswalkers create enough tokens to protect themselves while building up towards their ultimate abilities. We, of course, have ways of taking infinite extra turns in this, and, you know, cards like All-Be-One really throw around some free damage for us. Our commander throws around damage and draws his cards, like Value Town, Population, Planeswalker Party. At this point, we're a little over halfway done with only 16 more decks to go, and Rebellion Rising, where you at, Rebellion Rising? Why am I blind? There we go. Is going to lead that pack. This is a deck that I've really souped up for my fiance, and is the definition of tokens go brrr. It's pumping out all kinds of tokens, pumping them up and letting them freely swing at everyone. The double strike that the commander gives them really just offers a ton of protection from blocks. But they're forced to block anyways, but not well. Because they don't want to take, you know, 10 double striking, even just like 2/2 or 3/3s, right? Assuming they didn't get massive buffs at this point. Still a lot of damage. And I assure you, this deck has ways of like, oh yeah, no, all my creatures are +20/+20 right now. It's like, what do you mean? And they're double striking? Get out of here. But I've definitely seen the deck, assuming it gets a good opening hand, or, you know, kind of like their god hand, really. Pop off by turn 5 or 6, landing it among the gods. Where are my Riders of Rohan? There you at. So Riders of Rohan is up next, and is a powerful human kindred deck from Lord of the Rings. And while these humans aren't reaching the heights of power that Kyler kind of hit, in terms of like, oh yeah, no, my creatures are all just +100/+100. They are better at swarming the field. And I think they're better at like the card advantage aspect of the game. So sometimes going wide is a little better than going big, especially in cases like this. So Riders of Rohan is going to sit nicely in front of Kyler, mocking him with all his power. Let's jump over to Slimefoot. Slimefoot and Squee is a masterpiece, if I do say so myself. It's Graveyard Recursion, built onto my commander. We're dumping creatures from both our hand and deck into the grave. We're sacrificing our commander for value, bringing them both back. We've also included a little spicy infinite combo to close out the game. All of the creatures we are looking to cheat out have powerful effects that let us bring home all the wins, landing us our third god tier deck. Sliver Swarm, where you at? There you at. Sliver Swarm is up next, and I haven't gotten to play it a ton. Just, you know, due to the number of decks that I own. If I don't love a deck, I don't tend to play it as often. You know, it kind of goes back into circulation and waits for its turn. But, you know, it definitely is a powerhouse. Slivers are a powerful, you know, kindred type. And, you know, with each new sliver in play, all of my slivers get more powerful. But that being said, the deck just isn't interesting. It's really play land, play new sliver, maybe attack, depending on board states, pass. There's obviously a few spells in there as well. It'll end up in the top of above average, because I do think that, like, it is a powerful deck. You know, having a bunch of effects on all of my creatures is kind of fun, but just not interesting. Get in there. Top of above average. You've earned it. Oh, timey-wimey. Timey-Wimey is our 4th Doctor Who deck, and a personal favorite of mine. Timey-Wimey has us taking advantage of the suspend mechanic, and take advantage of it we did. We have the ability to lock ourselves down every turn, avoiding damage and targeted spells, generating a ton of mana from a single spell, and bonus cards to boot. All this while casting spells from exile, earning extra value the entire time. All this to say, this deck easily lands itself at the top of super consistent. Tinker Time follows up Timey-Wimey, and it's a rough act to follow, but Tinker Time feels like it has potential to be an interesting deck. And I've seen it develop decent board states in a pretty decent amount of time, but it feels like it really lacks a win condition. And, you know, no win condition kind of makes it a meh deck. So it's going to have decent combos, but not consistent for me. Urza Chief Artificer is a powerful deck that I've souped up for my fiance. Given a few turns, those little constructs that, you know, the commander is making turn into a powerful army. Having them out also reduces the cost to recast him, so even removing him from, like, the field, if you're only removing him, doesn't do a lot. They're gonna recast him. The fact that he adds menace to each of those, like, now massive artifact, you know, constructs makes it super hard to chump block them effectively. This deck relies heavily on the commander sticking around for multiple turns. So if they're removed early, right, they've only got, like, we'll say one construct out, and they're removed, you know, it kind of starts to stumble and fall, where other decks, you know, the commander sticking around is obviously important, but, like, I feel like this one is, like, a real hinge point, you know what I mean? That being said, it will end itself in the above average section, kind of towards the top of it, but just not quite super consistent. Let's put it right here. Velociraptor is deadly out of the box, and with a few modifications, even deadlier. The commander is pure value, allowing you to discover once per turn when a dino ETBs, which includes itself. The dinos in this deck have a ton of synergy with each other and can even, you know, pack a punch if you aren't ready for them. Landing this deck in super consistent. I'd probably put it there. That feels like a good spot. Virtue and Valor. Virtue and Valor is up next, and while I think you should swap the commander out of the box, just to add some speed, a little bit more value, there's no denying how powerful the enchantment focus decks could be. This is another deck claimed by my fiance, but I've seen her consistently pilot it to have, like, big impacts on the board. It feels a little less explosive than some of the other decks we've already gone over, but it easily lands itself in the above average category. Where in the category would it go? I'd probably put it here. Let's call it there. That's a good spot. Belladros. So we're actually at the point where, like, these are some older videos and their thumbnails haven't been updated. I'm gonna have to fire that editor, who was myself. But we're creating a ton of paths. We're stacking them for life gain, card draw, and power. We have a sneaky combo in the deck, which actually requires 3 pieces. But we do a lot of digging through the deck, through card draw, so, like, it's very possible to achieve the goal. Where we just basically win on the spot, where we mill everyone out. And then we laugh, hysterically. Maniacally, even. But yeah. Belladros is super consistent. I'm gonna put him below Food and Fellowship, but above Paradox Power. Little hints, I don't know how well you guys can see this, but the 3-card combo is sitting right here. Corrupting Influence is up next. And it's, it's a poison deck. We're looking to poison out our opponents. We're using a lot of the new toxic mechanics and a little bit of the old school infect mechanic. That being said, I have since swapped the commander to Atraxa. With the extra color we've added, we have even more proliferate effects. We're really pushing those poison counters hard. Because it is poison, naturally the pawn doesn't like playing against it. It doesn't get the same hate that Mill gets. But, it's definitely something that puts a target on your back. That being said, the deck plays really well. It's still super consistent. I just don't play it as much as some of the other decks that are in that category. Up next, we have Trelasara, Moondancer. So Trelasara is a powerful scrying, life-gaining kind of deck that lets us dig through our deck multiple times a turn, leaving the key pieces on top while our commander just gets bigger and bigger. We have a few ways of making our commander unblockable, so a single hit or two. You're just removed from the game via commander damage. And of course, we have some, little infinite combos in the deck to just go ahead and just end the game immediately. All that to say, Trelasara is another one of my god tier decks. Following that is another deck that I've since taken apart, but not because it wasn't strong. My elves were very powerful and capable of swarming the field, alongside any other token deck. They had a lot of built-in protection, ways of getting pumped multiple times, but it might have been a little too powerful for my pod. They really hated having to face it because it popped off very quickly. My fiance actually had a goblin deck that suffered the same fate. They were a little too quick, a little too powerful for the pod that we play with, and so we took them apart. And that's just the nature of Commander, right? It is a social game. But that being said, it'll end up being super consistent. I'm going to have it at the bottom of super consistent just because, like I said, I've taken it apart, the social aspects of the game. I'm not looking to ever pub stomp. I'm looking for a good, fun, balanced game where everyone kind of gets to do a little something, but ultimately we have a winner. Prosper Tomebound is up next, and I have made massive modifications to this deck. The card advantage that it offers through exiling cards is no joke. I get to cast all those cards. I've had games where I've probably played half my deck, and they weren't crazy long games in they weren't crazy long games in terms of the number of turns that had passed. It just lets me dig. And so I dug. But, the ability to play half your deck in a game easily lands Prosper among the gods. So let's just... Prosper, come on and hang out up here. Did the click not work? There we go. Just a little delayed. We're down to 2 decks, and we're going to run off with Omnath, Locus of Creation. It's raining lands. We're ideally looking to play 3 lands each turn, but at some point, we do in fact just kind of run out of lands. By then we've hopefully won, but this deck tends to kind of hit a wall. Landing it in decent, but not consistent for me. I think I could change around the mana base and really make it into above average, maybe super consistent. I don't think I'll ever have it hit god tier, but yeah, you have potential on that. I believe in you. Last up is Unholy Knights. This deck is another train to value town. We're cheating knights out of our grave and rewarding ourselves with card advantage in the process. I don't play it as much as some of my other decks, but when I do fall in love with it all over again, making our final deck super consistent. Because I don't play it a ton, I'm just going to leave it at the bottom is super consistent, but like, it's pretty solid. But guys, those are the 40 decks that I've made videos for. I, of course, have more deck techs, to come. We're still looking into the logistics of filming Commander gameplay videos, so you can see these decks and many more kind of in action. We're writing scripts for some, like, kind of how-to things, some things that explain to new players how to play the game, things that are going to explain to even, like, veteran players how to look at the game a little deeper. Things of that nature. But as always, if you want to hang out outside of these videos, you can join the Discord. There's always a link in the description. We're gonna build decks. We're gonna sling spells over on Spell Table. We're gonna talk about anime. We're gonna just do all the fun stuff. But until next time, as always, good luck with your builds.